The morning air in Pine Ridge usually smelled of wet pine, diesel exhaust, and the sweet grease of the diner down on Highway 9. But when the red mist rolled in just past sunrise, it didn't smell like anything at all. It moved low to the ground, creeping over the asphalt like a living tide, swallowing up the pickup trucks parked outside the feed store, and turning the bright neon signs into dull, bruised embers. Joey adjusted his duty belt, the leather creaking in the damp cold. He stood on the porch of the station, his thumb hooked over his radio mic. Beside him, his wife Tracy clutched a heavy thermos of coffee, her knuckles white. She had refused to stay locked inside their house 3 blocks away. When the siren started, Tracy had driven straight to the precinct. "It's not burning off, Joey," she said, her voice tight. She stared into the thick, crimson haze that now choked Main Street. "Look at the trees. The leaves are already curling." Joey looked across the street. The canopy of maples bordering the courthouse square wasn't just losing color. The bark was blistering, bubbling as if exposed to a slow-burning flame. "Stay close to the double doors," Joey told her, keeping his voice steady for the sake of the half-dozen terrified townspeople crowded into the lobby behind them. "We keep everyone inside until we know what we're breathing." That was the mistake, though. They thought it was in the air. 30 yards away, Old Man Vance stumbled out of his hardware store, coughing violently. He took 3 staggering steps into the crimson fog, before dropping to his knees in the middle of the empty street. Joey vaulted the railing, his boots hitting the pavement. "Vance, get back inside." Vance didn't answer. He clawed at his own throat, his fingers tearing at his collar, then his skin. His face twisted into an expression of sheer, unadulterated agony, not the look of a man suffocating, but of someone enduring a sudden, unbearable torment from the inside out. He let out a wet, strangled scream that cut short as he rolled onto his side, still twitching, trapped in a waking nightmare, while his nervous system flailed, piece by piece. Joey reached the edge of the mist, the heavy, metallic tang of copper filling his nose. He froze. The mist wasn't just a gas. It was millions of microscopic, vibrating specks. He grabbed Vance by the tactical vest, hauled him backward out of the red cloud, and slammed him onto the concrete steps of the station. Vance was still breathing, but his eyes were rolled back, his body locked in a rigid spasm of silent torture. "Lock the doors!" Joey shouted back into the precinct. Tracy pulled the heavy glass shut, throwing the deadbolt, just as the crimson wall surged forward, licking against the glass like a blind animal testing its cage. By nightfall, the town hall had been converted into a makeshift command center. The red mist had settled, hovering a steady 4 feet off the ground, throughout the lower valley, turning Pine Ridge into an island of the living, suspended above a sea of crimson pain. Inside the municipal gym, flashlight beams cut through the gloom. Dust motes danced in the pale circles of light. Joey stood by a folding table spread with local topographical maps, a grease pencil in his hand. "We ration the bottled water from the cellar," Joey said, looking around the circle of community leaders. "And nobody goes near the floor level. If anyone feels a burning sensation in their skin, report it immediately." "Report it for what, Joey? So you can lock him in a closet?" The voice came from the back bleachers. Cal Henderson stepped forward into the light. Cal owned the largest cattle ranch in the county, and he wore his Stetson low, a heavy-caliber lever-action rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. Behind him stood 6 of his ranch hands, all armed, all looking mean. "Cal, this isn't the time for your nonsense," Joey said, lowering the grease pencil. "We have to hold the line together. If we turn on each other, the mist wins." "The mist is just weather, Sheriff," Cal spat, stepping closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Nasty weather, sure, but you're acting like a dictator, locking down supplies and telling us we can't check our properties. My prize bulls are out in the south pasture. You think I'm going to sit here and let them choke while you play mayor? Your bulls would be screaming in the dirt within 2 minutes of stepping into that red stuff," Tracy said, stepping out from behind the supply stacks. Her eyes flashed with anger. Vance is still out in the cot in the back, Cal. You want to go ask him how it feels? Vance is old and weak, one of Cal's hands shouted from the shadows. The whole town's going soft. We're riding out of the valley tonight. Me and the boys rigged up the old flatbed with extra filters on the intakes. We're heading for the ridge. The ridge is 5 miles through the thickest part of that basin, Joey warned, stepping around the table. You won't make it a quarter mile before your engine stalls out and the mist seeps through the seals. Then you'll be out there in the open. Try and stop us, Sheriff, Cal said, leveling his gaze at Joey. The rancher's men unslung their rifles, the metallic clicks echoing loudly in the gymnasium. A collective gasp rose from the townspeople, huddled near the basketball hoops. Joey's hand hovered over his holster. For a second, the tension in the room was so thick it rivaled the fog outside. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Joey lifted his hand away from his weapon. Go ahead, Cal, Joey said quietly. Take your truck, take your men, but you take every supply you packed with you, and don't expect us to open the doors when you start screaming to come back in. Cal sneered, spit on the gymnasium floor, and gestured to his crew. Come on, boys, let's show these cowards how real folk handle a bad storm. The heavy metal doors of the municipal building rattled as Cal's flatbed roared to life outside. Through the high wire mesh windows, the townspeople watched the headlights cut feeble beams into the crimson haze. The truck lurched forward, its tires churning up gravel, and plunged down the hill toward the lower valley. For 10 minutes, the gym was dead silent. People held their breath, straining for the sound of the engine. Then came the scream. It wasn't Cal's voice, but one of his ranch hands, a high, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed off the hillsides. The truck engine revved wildly, bounced against a ditch, and stalled with a sickening crunch of metal. Then silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. Nobody spoke. No one moved toward the doors. Cal's rebellion had ended before it reached the edge of town. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. The red mist began to churn. It didn't just sit low anymore. It began to swirl upward in violent vertical pillars, spinning like red tornadoes inside the narrow streets. The floorboards of the municipal building vibrated, a faint, rhythmic thrumming that started in the soles of everyone's feet and worked its way up into their teeth. Joey, Tracy whispered, grabbing his sleeve. She pointed toward the large gable windows near the roof. The red mist outside was glowing now, pulsing with a deep inner bioluminescence that turned the night sky the color of fresh blood. The vibrations grew stronger, shaking dust from the rafters. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't an earthquake. It was too heavy, too deliberate. Joey drew his service pistol, the familiar weight of the steel offering cold comfort against the rising panic in the room. Everyone away from the windows, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. He moved toward the heavy front doors, sliding back the iron security bar. Tracy followed right behind him, carrying a high-powered tactical flashlight. Joey, you can't go out there. I have to see what's pushing it, Joey replied, his eyes fixed on the pulsing red glow outside. He cracked the door open just an inch. The air that rushed in smelled like hot ozone and ancient crushed earth. The red mist parted slightly, pushed aside by a massive displacement of air. Joey stepped out onto the porch, the red fog curling around his boots like grasping fingers. He immediately felt a sharp, needle-like prickle on his ankles, where his uniform trousers met his socks, but he ignored the burning sensation, forcing his gaze upward through the glowing crimson haze. The mist was clearing directly above them, pushed away by an immense, unimaginable bulk. Standing at the edge of the valley, towering far above the church steeple and the highest ridge of pine trees, was a silhouette so massive it defied comprehension. It was a bipedal titan of impossible proportions. Its skin, a patchwork of dark armored plates that looked like ancient stone and rusted iron. The red mist wasn't a weather phenomenon at all. It was the steam and particulate matter rolling off the creature's immense, shifting hide as it breathed. The Titan took another step forward. The ground heaved beneath Joey's feet, a literal shockwave of muscle and bone shifting weight. Joey stared up into the towering wall of darkness and red light, his breath catching at his throat. The creature paused just 100 yards from the municipal building, blotting out the stars. Inside the doorway, Tracy shone the flashlight beam outward, the light catching Joey's face. His eyes were wide, reflecting the eerie crimson glare of the mist as he looked up at the towering horror looming over his hometown. Then the monster tilted its massive head back into the glowing red clouds, and a roar tore through the valley, a deafening bass-heavy shockwave that shattered every window in Pine Ridge and drowned out the last cries of the world they used to know. The concussive force of the roar hit the municipal building like a physical wall. Shards of glass rained down across the gymnasium floor as the remaining windows imploded, scattering the townspeople into a panic of screams and huddled bodies. Tracy dropped the heavy flashlight, the beam rolling across the floorboards to illuminate the chaotic dust motes dancing in the dark. She threw her arms over her head, shielding her face from the razor-sharp debris before fighting her way through the overturned chairs toward the open doorway. "Joey!" she screamed over the residual vibrating drone that hummed through the valley. Outside on the porch, Joey was struggling to stay on his feet. The air tasted of burning iron and stale ozone, so thick it felt like swallowing liquid fire. His lungs seized, but he forced a shallow breath past his teeth, his vision blurring at the edges. He blinked hard, trying to clear the sting from his eyes as he looked up into the shifting blood-hued vapor. The Titan didn't move again immediately. It loomed above the tree line like a mountain range carved from raw, jagged slate, its massive shoulders blotting out the upper atmosphere. The air rolling off its hide carried a strange radioactive heat that made the hair on Joey's arms stand on end. Tracy burst through the doorway, grabbing the back of Joey's tactical vest and hauling him backward just as a massive, heavy footstep sent a fresh shockwave rippling through the concrete foundation. The ground cracked like dried mud beneath the porch steps. "Get inside! We have to seal this door right now!" Tracy shouted, her voice breaking under the weight of sheer terror. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Joey slammed the heavy metal door shut, throwing the deadbolt and sliding the thick iron security bar back into its brackets, just as something immense brushed against the exterior wall. The entire building groaned, wood splintering and metal groaning under the strain, but the barricade held. Inside the gymnasium, the mood had shifted from defiant fear to a cold, hollow despair. The townspeople had retreated to the center of the hardwood floor, far away from the exterior walls where the glowing red haze continued to press against the wire mesh windows like a hungry tide. A few people were weeping quietly in the corners, while others stared blankly into space, completely broken by the reality of what stood outside. Joey leaned back against the locked metal doors, his chest heaving, sweat cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. He looked down at his uniform pants. The fabric near his boots was scorched and tattered, leaving angry red welts mapping the lower parts of his shins. The mist didn't just burn, it ate away at everything it touched, slow and methodical. Tracy knelt beside him, tearing a strip of cloth from the bottom of her shirt to wrap tightly around his burning ankles. Her fingers were steady, though her face was pale in the dim emergency lighting. "Cal and his men didn't make it," a voice said from the shadows near the bleachers. It was Old Man Vance's daughter, her eyes hollow as she clutched a small transistor radio. "I tried scanning the frequencies. Nothing's coming through except static. No emergency broadcasts, no state police. We're completely cut off." Joey nodded slowly, gritting his teeth as Tracy tied off the makeshift bandage. "I know. We're on our own." "And that thing out there?" Tracy asked softly, looking up into Joey's eyes. "What do we do when it decides to finish tearing this town apart?" Joey looked around the room, meeting the terrified gazes of the neighbors he had sworn an oath to protect. There were no more easy answers left, no tactical manuals to flip through, and no backup coming down the highway. Outside, the heavy rhythmic breathing of the Colossus continued to shake the foundation of the valley, a low and menacing drumbeat that promised the night was only just beginning. The emergency generator behind the municipal building sputtered, coughed twice, and died, plunging the gymnasium into a heavy, suffocating gloom. The only light came from the unnatural, ruby-colored glare bleeding through the high wire mesh windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. Joey stood by the center court circle, his service pistol drawn, the barrel pointed firmly at the floor. The air inside the room was growing warmer, turning the thick atmosphere into a humid, metallic oven. Every breath felt like inhaling fine dust and hot copper. Around them, the townspeople had stopped crying. There was a grim, exhausted finality settling over the survivors. They huddled together near the bleachers, too tired to run, too broken to fight. "Joey," Tracy whispered, stepping up beside him. She didn't hold a flashlight anymore. She just reached out and gripped his forearm, her fingers cold against his skin. "It's coming back around." The floorboards didn't just vibrate this time. They groaned, nails popping loose from the joists as the massive weight shifted just outside the exterior wall. The heavy metal doors at the front entrance began to buckle inward, the iron security bar groaning under an irresistible, crushing pressure. Rivets snapped like dry twigs, pinging against the concrete interior. "Everybody back toward the rear exit," Joey shouted, his voice cutting through the rising rumble. "Move now!" People scrambled, stumbling over overturned chairs and clutching one another as they retreated toward the storage bay doors in the back. But Joey didn't move. He stood his ground, keeping himself between the collapsing front entrance and the remaining townspeople. With a deafening shriek of torn steel, the front doors blew inward, flying off their hinges and crashing onto the hardwood floor. The thick, ruby-tinted vapor poured into the gymnasium in a blinding wave, instantly scorching the walls and turning the air into a furnace. Through the ruined entryway, the towering Colossus filled the entire field of vision. It lowered its immense armored head, peering through the shattered doorframe with ancient, unblinking eyes that burned like dying stars. The heat was unbearable, searing the lungs and blistering exposed skin. Behind him, Tracy caught his arm, pulling him backward toward the safety of the rear alleyway as the rest of the townspeople spilled out into the night. Joey took one last step back, his boots slipping on the ash-covered floor. He looked up, his wide eyes reflecting the blazing, blood-toned light of the entity towering above the ruined town. Then, the monster parted its massive, jagged jaws deep within the ruby haze and let loose a final, world-shaking roar that swallowed the valley whole.